One of the key features in Keyframe Pro 2 is the ability to transition between sources seamlessly when using timelines. This ensures there are no pops, delays, or black frames between clips, where a clip is just a source in the timeline. Furthermore, any edits you make to a source's cut in and cut out points are automatically reflected in the timeline, allowing you to see how trims affect the overall sequence. Beyond the default timeline setup in a new project, you can create multiple timelines within the project. And in this case, I have a project with no timelines and 3 sources. So to create a new timeline, I'll first give focus to the project view, and this will display a row of buttons at the top of the view. The second button is New Timeline. Clicking on this will create a new timeline with the option to rename it. I'll just hit enter to accept the new timeline's name, and as you can see, it has been automatically opened in the A viewer. But it contains no sources, so there's nothing displayed in the viewer. It is also possible to create a new timeline by selecting either the Timelines folder or the Project folder, right-clicking and selecting the New Timeline option. Now, focusing on the new timeline that I just created, to add sources to this timeline, I will simply select a source from the project view and drag it down to the sources list in the timeline view. As soon as a source is added, that source is immediately displayed in the viewer. And you can add more than one source at a time by control-clicking or shift-clicking in the project view to select multiple files, and again, drag and drop. Now, just quickly, if you want to streamline this process of adding files, and here I'll delete this new timeline, you can also first select the sources to be added in the project view, right-click, and select New Timeline. This will create the new timeline with the selected sources already added. Within the timeline view, you can reorder clips by dragging and dropping them in the list, or by using the buttons at the top of the view to move the sources up and down. If you need to remove a clip, just select the item to be removed and hit the delete key or click the delete button. And if you happen to make a mistake, these operations can be undone by using the undo and redo operations. Now, if a specific shot needs to be trimmed, double-click on that source in the project view to open it in the A viewer. For this example, shot 2 has a long setup before the squirrel character displays his wings. The shot is 68 frames long, and I would like to see how it looks in the full sequence, so shot 1, 2, and 3, with a much quicker reveal. For this, I would like to trim about 40 frames from the start of the source. And I'll do this by setting the in point to frame 48. So I'm going to modify the in point, setting it to frame 48 by dragging and dropping on the global time control. I could also right-click and set the range start to current, if that's easier, or use the hotkeys that have been assigned. Switching back to the new timeline that contains shot 1, shot 2, and shot 3, you'll see that shot 2 in the timeline is much shorter. He goes straight to opening his wings. And one quick tip, the global time control alternates between dark gray and light gray colors to show where the different shots sit in the timeline. Additionally, if you have a timeline where source edits should be ignored, you can go into the timeline properties by selecting the Properties tab in the timeline view and turning off the Use Source In/Outs option. When this is disabled, the timeline will always use the full duration of the original source. So here you can see that shot 2 is much longer. And if you look at the total frames in the global time control, you can see how this value changes as I toggle the Use Source In and Out options. You can also see shot 2, the light gray section in the time control, gets much shorter when I turn the Use Source In and Out options back on. In addition to creating timelines with multiple sources, another very helpful use of timelines is when comparing two sources that have different start frames. Using two versions of Shot 2 to demonstrate, I have the original full version loaded in Viewer A and the shorter version in Viewer B. Now, I would like to compare the files for animation differences. Unfortunately, they do not line up because the original version needs to start on frame 48. To fix this, I will need to edit the in point for the longer version and create a timeline for it. So I'll start by making sure that the full version is loaded in Viewer A, and I'm going to set the in point to frame 48. Next, I will create a timeline that only contains the source for the full version. To save time, I'm going to select the source, and then I will click the New Timeline button. This will create a new timeline with the selected source and load it in the A viewer. Then I'll give the timeline a new name, Full Width Trimmed Start, for clarity. And because this new timeline respects the source in and out points, it will be using frame 48 from the source as the first frame. And it's now possible to compare the animation of these two sources as if they start on the same frame. Another important feature available with timelines is the ability to override the source audio with a separate master audio file applied to the entire timeline. This can be the audio from any imported source. To override the audio, first make sure that the timeline is loaded in the A viewer, and then in the timeline view, select the Properties tab. At the top, there is an Audio Override property, and you can simply drag and drop the override source from the project view onto this line edit. So I'll select Master Audio from the project view and drag it onto the audio override. The source name will be displayed as the audio override track, which will be heard during playback in place of the original source audio. Now, to remove the audio override, simply click the Clear button.